Okay, it's 11:33. That's our designated time. So first of all, welcome. To those of you who don't know us, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Linda Zangrilli. I'm the current chapter chair for SCORE Bucks County. And just a few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording as well as a copy of all the slides a few hours after the presentation ends. So you don't have to take copious notes. You'll be covered. Please put your questions as you go, I know you'll have them as we go along. Put them in the Q&A. We will address all the questions at the end of the event. Please do not put them in the chat, and please refrain from using the chat to advertise your business. Okay, just a few commercial words about SCORE, who we are, what we do. For those of you who are unfamiliar, SCORE is a national nonprofit organization. We have some 10 to 13,000 volunteers all over the country, and we have about 350 chapters. We have a very, very simple mission, and that is to help small business start, grow, and thrive. We do that through webinars like this. They're all free thanks to COVID. And we do these just about every Tuesday at this same time frame. We have some exceptions, but for the most part, you can count on Webinar Tuesday, if you will, at 11:30. We are a resource partner of the Small Business Administration. And one of the other ways that we help small business, in addition to these webinars, is free mentoring services. So if you're a small business that is either just starting and you're not sure what to do, you don't know the steps, how do I file through the state of Pennsylvania, what are the legalities of it, or you just need some help with marketing, accounting, you name it, our volunteers in the chapter here in Bucks County, there's some 70 people. They come from all walks of life. They're accountants, they're marketers, they have social media skills. They have just about any skill you would need to get your business going. So whether you're just starting or you've been in business for a while, need a little push, I encourage you to go to our website, buckscounty.score.org, and just hit the button that says, I want a mentor, and we will take it from there. We'll put that URL in the chat so you can get it, but I'm sure you're getting familiar with us because I know our marketing team is very good at sending out our marketing events like this. So, what do we do in Bucks County? We cover the entire county as well as Eastern Montgomery County. Now, just because you might be out of the county, it doesn't matter. We have a policy called One SCORE. If you come into our chapter and you should be in a different chapter, we'll redirect you, or we can handle it ourselves. We cover anyone all over the country. That's the beauty of our One SCORE policy. Many times clients will go to our score.org, which is the national website, and search for a mentor by a particular skill set. And so the client could be anywhere in the country and they could request a mentor by the skill set. So I encourage you to take advantage of it. It's a free service. There's nothing better than free. We all know that. And so please, if you need help, please look for us, buckscounty.score.org. Okay, end of my commercial. Today, we are really fortunate to have with us an expert in this topic, and we all need to know about this. I love the pictures that are on the screen. It kind of strikes the fear of God in you, doesn't it? When you see trees falling through houses and cars coming through garages. Yeah, so our speaker today is Tom Cuny. He's a partner at KMRD Partners in Warrington. He's responsible for servicing the day-to-day needs of portfolio of small to mid-sized businesses. So he fits right in with our demographic here. Tom also manages KMRD's personal lines division. He's been in the insurance business since 1986. As his client's risk manager and insurance broker, Tom coordinates the negotiation of renewal coverage terms, conditions and pricing, claims and loss control services, quality control reviews of policies and endorsements, along with other important risk management services such as contract reviews, bid and accrual support, and forecasting. Therefore, he's the expert. He knows all about it. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Linda, for the introduction, and I welcome all of you to what you should know about business liability insurance. A little bit further about me. I started my career with the Aetna when the Aetna was still in the property casualty business back in 1986 after I graduated from college. And I started in their commercial insurance division as a casualty claims adjuster. And casualty fits right in with our general liability topic. Casualty is really my background, and it really refers more to how businesses can get themselves into legal issues when people sustain, third parties sustain bodily injury and property damage. When you and your business or your products or your services hurt other people or damage their property. So I did that for a few years, and then I got out into the agency side of the business, and I bought my own agency back in 1996, ran that successfully for 20 plus years, and then merged in here with KMRD Partners back in 2017. We're an independent insurance agent, and what that really means to the business owners is we represent numerous different insurance companies. At this point, we represent over 50 different A-rated insurance companies. So what we can do is we can kind of fit the best coverage at the best possible price for our client base. And that's what we do, and we do it very well. We have clients that pay as little as a few $100s a year. And we have clients that you would know by name that pay several $1 million in premium a year. So that's really kind of the wide spread of clients that we have, from mom and pop, one-man, two-man operations, all the way up to multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar operations with international presences as well. Over the years, I've seen businesses and individuals, cause other people harm and injuries that really run the gamut from, they've been maimed, killed, hurt, placed in wheelchairs, all because of the negligence of somebody else. And that's what we're here today to discuss, and how you can transfer that risk to an insurance company. You buy $1 million liability policy or several $1 million liability policy. The thing I want you to keep in mind as a business owner is really every day you go out into the business world and you're swimming with sharks. The courts in a lot of instances are not your friends. And just a couple recent examples. One of my clients has a large internet presence. They're an internet retailer, and they're currently being sued under ADA laws because this woman that is suing them is sight impaired, and their internet site is not ADA compliant to help people that are sight impaired navigate their website, and they're in violation of federal ADA guidelines, and they're currently being sued for that. Also kind of a crazy case on the personal line side involving Geico. In Missouri, a woman and her male partner, friend, she contracted an STD in the back seat of this gentleman's car, and the Missouri courts determined that instance was a car accident, believe it or not. And Geico right now is being forced to pay this woman $5.2 million for this car accident related injury that she sustained in the backseat of the car. So the courts are not always on your side. They're not always your friend. And geographic areas, the court systems can really, in a lot of ways, work to your detriment and look to give plaintiffs a lot of money. And if you're not insured correctly, it can really, really harm your business. Lastly, before we get started, price in everything is always important. But please never buy the cheap insurance policy. You want to buy the right insurance policy and always go through an advisor to help you along the way to make sure that you actually have the right coverage at the right price. So let's dive in here on what is a general liability policy. A general liability policy, in essence, will cover you and your business for bodily injury and property damage that you or your employees or your volunteers cause to a third party. Okay, so bodily injury and property damage, very, very specific. The general liability policy is a very, very broad policy. And just a couple examples, and we'll dive a little deeper into some more specific examples as to what a general liability covers. So if somebody comes in and they visit your business and they trip and fall on some loose floor covering and they're hurt, the general liability policy covers instances like that. In the retail world, we see some false arrest claims where you have a shoplifter or an alleged shoplifter in your store. You accuse them, and it turns out they may not have been shoplifting, and they sue you for that, for false arrest. That is also covered under the general liability policy. An employee that is in your painting construction business accidentally leaves the water running in a location that they're working and causes substantial damage to the customer's home. Those instances are covered. Or you have an instance where there's a class action lawsuit filed against your business alleging advertising injury or infringement on trademarks. You can be sued for those type of situations as well. So what does a general liability policy cover? So the general liability policy will cover you for legal costs, defense costs, and will pay on your behalf if you are found liable up to the policy limits that you've purchased. Comprehensive or commercial general liability coverage is one of the most important products you can buy due to the negative impact that a lawsuit can have on your business. And these situations happen frequently. So as I've said earlier, the main things that the general liability policy covers you for are bodily injury and property damage that you're legally obligated to pay due to your negligence. One of the other things that general liability policies will often pay for are mental anguish injuries. So if somebody at a job site, let's say, witnesses somebody get hurt or killed, they may not be injured themselves, but just because they witnessed it and now they have mental issues, a third party that witnesses an injury can come back and sue you for mental anguish claims. Workers' compensation coverage is needed for all your employees, and that is work-related injuries are in no way covered under your workers' compensation policy. That's a whole nother discussion, the workers' compensation policy. But just so that you're aware that the bodily injury and property damage claims that occur to your employees, that all employers in Pennsylvania are required to carry workers' compensation coverage for all employees and uninsured subcontractors. Another big plus of purchasing a general liability policy, you also pick up what's called personal and advertising injury. Personal and advertising injury protects your business against liability arising out of certain offenses, such as libel and slander. So libel and slander are Defamation type of claims. You say something about someone that's not true. You place that in writing. You publish those type of situations. And somebody comes back to you and sues you because you damaged their reputation, whether individually or business-wise, or you've done the same to their business. I kind of touched on false arrest a little earlier, but false arrest is also considered personal and advertising injury under the general liability policy. We see it frequently on larger type of businesses that they protect their copyrights and their names and their copyrights and their patents very, very closely, because it's very, very important to them, and it costs a lot of money, and they don't want you using their name or their copyrights to take business away from them. So infringing on copyrights is another example of personal and advertising injury that's covered under the general liability policy. Malicious prosecution is also covered under the general liability policy. Again, we see that in a lot of retail arenas where people are accused of stealing or shoplifting when they weren't. Also, another example of personal and advertising injury is the use of someone else's advertising idea. And then landlords, they can get involved in situations of wrongful eviction, wrongful entry, invasion of privacy. So they didn't follow the rules, the legal rules in evicting a tenant. They enter a tenant's location without their permission, or while they're there, or they're in the middle of a private activity, and in walks the landlord. So the landlord has to be very, very careful about what they do, because in so many instances, you're opening yourself up for legal issues if you're not following the law to the letter of the law. And then the third part of the general liability policy is what's called medical payments. I'd like to refer to this as a brinksmanship type of coverage. And this will cover regardless of liability, normally in a much smaller amount. Most policies limit medical payments to $5,000, $10,000, and maybe as high as $15,000. And it will pay for medical expenses only, regardless of liability, in order to avoid a lawsuit going further. And an example of that is you get the UPS guy that comes in to your business to drop off a package, and he trips and falls over his shoelaces that were untied. Well, that's not your fault, but the accident happened on the premises. So the insurance companies look at that and they say, well, we'd like to avoid a lawsuit going further. We'll use this medical payments portion of the policy to pay for medical bills only, as a goodwill type of coverage to hopefully avoid this thing progressing any further. So if the lawsuit does arise out of a situation like that, then the insurance company will dip into your much higher liability limits and defend and indemnify you and your business in the event that it's a covered loss and it goes further. So I like to talk about the general liability policy using more real life examples rather than getting into a lot of the techno babble and the policy language of an insurance policy. So let's review some real life situations that have occurred over the years to my clients. The first one occurred right down the street here in Warrington, Pennsylvania, several winters ago. My client owns an office type complex where there's a lot of doctors and office type of exposures that rent his space and pay him monthly rent. So that's what this gentleman does for a living. He's a landlord. Like around here in the wintertime, it snowed. And there was an ice and snow buildup, and one of his tenant's employees was going to work the next morning. She slipped, she fell, she broke her hip, and she sued the landlord because she alleged that the property, the ice and snow, was not properly cleaned from the premises. This case recently settled out of court for $325,000. In addition to the $325,000 settlement, the insurance company also spent in excess of $50,000 in legal fees and defense costs, attorney costs, which was all covered under the policy. So in this instance, my client had literally no out-of-pocket expenses. It was all covered under the general liability policy. Several years back, I had a contractor that was doing some interior work at a customer's home, and they were putting in all new doors. So they had to rip out all the old doors and put the new doors in, and they were finish framing around several areas. And this gentleman drove a finish nail. Unbeknownst to him, it slightly pierced the water line that was behind the drywall and the studs. Several years went by, and the head of this nail rusted away because of the water and the metal chemical reaction that took place. And the tip of the nail rusted away, and this water line years later began to leak. And upon investigation, it was determined that a nail was driven in, and our client did the work. And there was roughly about $15,000 in property damage that was done to the client's home, the client of the contractor. And the insurance company paid the full $15,000 in property damage because our contractor negligently drove a nail into a water line several years before. So again, that was all paid under the general liability policy. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, I insured a retail beer distributor down in the Swarthmore area, down in Delaware County. Someone came in one night and tried to rob the beer distributor, and the clerk at the beer distributor, who happened to be a Westchester college student trying to make a couple extra bucks to pay for their college tuition, shot and killed the burglar. And the burglar's family retained an attorney, filed a lawsuit, a civil suit, a wrongful death suit, claiming that our clerk should not have shot and killed the alleged robber. And the insurance company dug their heels in. They fought the claim. It went on for close to 7 years, went to a jury trial. We won, but the insurance company paid in excess of $200,000 in legal fees for our beer distributor and the clerk that were being sued in the civil suit. So we won the case. But again, legal fees can get very, very costly for businesses for allegations that either they're frivolous or their case has no merit. So we see frequently those type of lawsuits arise on a general liability basis. Several years back down in Philadelphia, we had an alleged shoplifter who sued our retail store for excessive force when security guards tackled her when she was leaving the store with stolen merchandise. So we took this case, the insurance company took this case to trial. The woman fractured her wrist and it required surgery. This went to a jury, and the Philadelphia jury agreed that our security guards should not have been as forceful in making sure that their merchandise didn't leave the premises, and the jury awarded $150,000 in damages. Another instance of a general liability claim, I insured a general contractor a number of years back when he was sued at a job site when one of his subcontractors fell through an unsecured opening at a job site. So it was a second floor. It was a stairway access that they didn't have the proper safety measures set up to avoid somebody stepping in this essentially open hole. This gentleman fell a full story, broke numerous bones, and he was that case settled for $450,000. This one's a rather interesting one. I had a retail home brewery supply company down in the Mayfair section of Philadelphia that was sued by Heineken Beer for infringing upon their trademark. This gentleman purchased several knockoff Heineken neon bar signs and Heineken clocks that had the Heineken logo on them. And he bought these things direct from China. And these particular items were not patented or trademarked properly through Heineken. Heineken, their general counsel, apparently surfs the internet frequently for, I guess, the trademark infringement situation, and they saw these items online, and they actually purchased one to determine whether or not it met their trademark standards, and if the trademark fees had been paid. They were not. Heineken sued my client, and they were awarded $50,000 in damages for trademark infringement. And then finally, a small property damage claim. An auto repair shop did not tighten the plug on an oil pan after an oil change for one of their clients, and the car leaked out. The oil leaked out of the car. The engine seized, and it cost us $8,000 for a new motor. So those are prime examples of general liability claims. General liability is not the only way that businesses can run into issues. Many businesses require what's called professional liability. In some arenas, it's called errors and omissions coverage. Doctors call it malpractice coverage. So what's the difference between professional liability and a general liability claim? And the way that I like to think of it is, in most instances, as I've said before, the general liability claims cover physical risk, bodily injury, property damage, where you damage something tangible. You damage someone's person, or you damage their business, you damage their property. A professional liability claims are more abstract. And I like to use the examples of any business that's giving any advice or professional advice. Those businesses need a professional liability policy, big or small, and it doesn't really matter what you do. A contractor, for example, could certify a roof for a realtor. A roofer could climb up onto a roof and say, yeah, this roof looks good to me. I think you're going to get another 15 years out of this roof. And then after the people buy the home, the roof isn't any good. Or you could have an electrician certify an electrical system in a building or a home, and they give their professional opinion that this electrical system is up to grade and is in good shape, and it may not be. We get into more traditional professional liability policies and errors and omissions policies for more individuals and businesses that you would think that would need it. The accountants, the lawyers, the insurance agents, information technology and computer consultants all need professional liability policies if they're charging a fee for their professional advice. Some states require certain businesses to have professional liability, and all of them, all states have, the healthcare requirement for medical malpractice. Many states have requirements for accountants and insurance agents to carry professional liability policies. in the event that they give out bad advice. And those are the type of claims that we see happen frequently. And I wanted to bring that out and point that out to you, that because oftentimes people think that their professional advice is covered under the general liability policy, and in many, many instances, it is not. So here's some examples again of some people that some businesses that may require some professional liability coverage: lawyers, law firms, consultants, professionals, accountants and tax preparers, home inspectors, technology professionals, your financial advisors and whatnot. They should all have professional liability coverage. Anybody giving you advice for a fee should have professional liability coverage. So let's get into some examples of how your professional exposure and your professional advice can get you into legal trouble. I had a client that was involved in a situation. They were a computer consultant. They were hired to create a new computer system for the client, and their client alleged that once it was installed, number one, it wasn't functional, and number two, it corrupted all of their existing information, and they couldn't operate their own business, and had a substantial gap in functionality in their own business in order to generate revenue on their own. So that case was settled out of court for $70,000. A mortgage broker client of mine failed to process a loan application on a timely basis, which resulted in the borrower losing an agreed upon rate. So their interest rate went up substantially because my client made a mistake. The rate increased, and the borrower was when it was unable to secure a comparable loan, and it cost the borrower a lot of money. This case cost $225,000 to the policyholder. A safety consultant on a professional liability claim resulted when the claimant, the person that was injured, alleged that the critical inspection report was not comprehensive enough to have prompted the client to take precautionary measures to avoid an explosion that resulted in one fatality and one severe injury. Just over 1.1 million to settle that one. A medical billing company received a lawsuit from a client for failing to submit and collect medical billings for patient care to insurance companies on a timely basis. That was $105,000. The computer consultant was assisting a client with their credit card processing from one vendor to another. It was alleged that the insured failed to follow their own guidelines and procedures during the process and mishandled sensitive information. Almost $2 million on that one was paid under the professional liability policy. A property manager on the professional liability claim filed was involving a class action lawsuit alleging that the insured reviewed the applicant's eviction reports without their consent. Those privacy laws can get a lot of folks into trouble. $205,000 for that violation. A private school hired management consultant to assist them with employee recruitment activities. The suit alleges that the insured performed inadequate background checks and failed to identify the employee's criminal history, which included a sexual assault on a minor. There was $240,000 that was paid on that one. So various type of professional liability issues that many businesses. So for all of you business owners out there, please make sure that you investigate your need for professional liability coverage in addition to your general liability policy. Another large exposure for businesses these days are the current employment laws in all states, and there are even some federal guidelines now on what you can and can't do in the workspace involving your employees. Employees today can sue their employers for wrongful hiring, wrongful firing, hostile workplace. You fired me because of my race, my color, my creed, my sexual orientation, my disability. You didn't hire me because of my race, my color, my creed, my sexual identity, my disability. So employers today are really walking through a minefield of employment law every single day. Even third parties now can sue you, or third parties can cause a lawsuit because you don't handle things correctly. If you have a vendor that comes in and sexually harasses an employee or makes inappropriate statements to an employee, if you don't handle that situation correctly, you can be sued for what are called employment practices liability coverage. So in most instances, your employment practices liability coverage will pay for attorney's fees, settlement fees, legal judgments, administrative costs. But what an employment practices policy won't cover is civil and criminal fines, punitive damages, wages that you should have paid or cheated people out of. And that's a big thing these days. Be very, very careful about keeping correct time with hourly employees these days, because many employees file wage dispute cases against their employers once they're fired or terminated. They won't pay for instances of intentional employer wrongdoing, damage caused to employee property, alleged injuries to employees, litigation regarding unemployment benefits, and disputes surrounding workers' compensation claims. So again, wrongful hiring, wrongful firing, sexual harassment, ADA claims, huge upticks in those type of claims over the last couple of years. And now that the economy is slowing and we're expecting to see layoffs for many companies in the near future, we're anticipating, again, an uptick in these type of claims that come in that are going to be prosecuted against employers. So some real life examples of employment practices liability claims. An age discrimination claim lawsuit was brought by a highly paid 62-year-old sales representative who was employed by our insured. He was terminated for not meeting sales quotas. Despite layoffs and cutbacks at the company, there was no documentation that showed that the plaintiff, the employee, was a poor performer, and he was awarded $540,000 because he was not terminated in the proper manner. Sexual harassment and wrongful termination claim. Several female employees at a company complained that the CEO was sexually harassing them. As required by law, the president proceeded to investigate the complaints. Within 1 month of the start of the investigation, without apparent backing of the board of directors, the president was terminated by the CEO under the pretext of performance issues. This was despite the fact that he was given a raise a few months earlier. The president filed a separate wrongful termination suit due to the conflict between the board of directors and the CEO. This one settled far in excess of the client's policy limits. It was millions of dollars. So that's another perfect example of sexual harassment and wrongful termination claim. Racial discrimination. A group of Indian descendant applicants sued a private retail store for ethnic and racial discrimination after learning they had been denied employment strictly based on their race and ethnic background. Defense costs and settlement was over $200,000. A retaliation claim. The executive assistant to the chief financial officer was terminated for divulging confidential information to staff regarding impending company layoffs. A suit was brought by the assistant for retaliation and sexual harassment as she claimed the CFO always made suggestive comments, and improperly touched her. Defending the CFO cost over $150,000. Now, retaliation claims are big. So as an employer, you really have to dot your I's and cross your T's, because many of these employment practices cases that we see have no merit, and they're strictly retaliation claims where you fire an employee and they're mad that they lost their job, and they walk out the door and they make up some crazy story that my employer sexually harassed me, my employer fired me because of my race, my employer fired me because of my age, because I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm too old, I'm too young, whatever it may be. The legal fees can add up very, very quickly in these cases. So be very, very careful, and document, and make sure that you consult an attorney or an employment practices expert before you make any layoffs or terminate any employees. A religious discrimination claim was brought by a former employee for religious discrimination. She alleged the hiring practices of our insured were unlawful because they stated they would only hire Christian workers. Once it was learned the plaintiff was not Christian, she was passed up for promotion. A settlement of $52,000 was reached. A disability discrimination claim. These are also interesting claims, especially for small business owners. An employee went out on medical leave for treatment of an illness. When he was ready to return to work, the insured told him his position had been filled by someone else and his job was no longer available. He filed a suit for lost wages, emotional distress, violation of disability discrimination statutes, and the defense cost and settlement was greater than $100,000 in this case. So whenever you have someone that goes out on an ADA protected liability illness, you have to hold their job for them, unfortunately. Whether you found somebody better to replace them or not, unfortunately, in most instances, you have to hire that person back. So employment practices, really a real Achilles heel for employers these days, and can really get employers into a lot of trouble. And the focus here really is most employers, and I agree with the statement that I'm about to make, is that most employers say to me, Tom, I would never discriminate against anybody. I would never sexually harass anybody. I would never racially discriminate against anybody or retaliate, whatever it may be. And they probably wouldn't. But those retaliation suits, nothing prevents your former employee from going to a lawyer and making up a story and coming after you legally for money. And just the legal fees alone can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's one of the main reasons why you want to buy an employment practices liability policy, because it will provide the defense costs and you can properly defend your reputation and your business in the event of a frivolous lawsuit brought by a former employee. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about cyber liability coverage. Cyber liability coverage today is, bar none, the greatest exposure that I feel that employers face today. Since the Ukraine conflict started, we are seeing a huge uptick in cyber liability claims. I've had clients, both large and small, be affected by cyber attacks. Their business systems are breached, and there's various different scams that go on out there that can be really detrimental and devastating to your business. So once a cyber attack occurs, what's covered under a cyber liability policy? In most instances, The forensic investigations are covered, like how deep did the hackers get? How much information did they obtain? Defense costs and litigation costs are covered under most policies. So if information or reputations and whatnot have been harmed, and whose information has been stolen from your computer system because of a breach, decide to litigate against you and sue you, those costs are usually covered. Regulatory costs, defense costs, fines, both federal, state, local governments will impose fines against you and require that you do certain things at your cost. You'll have to notify essentially everyone in your database that your system has been breached. You'll have to pay federal, state, and local fines for that breach because it took place. And then in most venues, for everyone that's been affected in your database, you will have to provide identity monitoring coverage for a year to a 2-year period, like the LifeLocks of the world. That can get very, very expensive. And that is also covered under the policy. Crisis management expenses are usually covered, and those fees are reasonable costs and expenses incurred by the policyholder and approved by the insurer for consulting services provided by a public relations firm or law firm in response to the crisis event. So it's damage control for your reputation and your business that you've been hacked. Oftentimes we think of law firms that get hacked or doctors' offices that get hacked. Their reputations are very, very important to them, and it doesn't look good that their business was hacked into, and potentially client information and records and that sort of thing are now out floating around on the dark web somewhere. So, and then in the event of a cyber attack, there's business interruption costs involved, where you may lose weeks, months of revenue generating time for your business because you're now dealing with a cyber attack. The cyber ransom claims, extortion claims are huge these days. In many instances, the hacker, they care less about the information that you have within your existing system. They just come in and they encrypt your system, they encrypt your backups, and then they hold you for ransom. They'll give you the encryption wording and the encryption key for money. I had a law firm 2 years back. They got hacked. It was a ransom claim. They shut their entire system down. They had 70 employees literally sitting around. They could do nothing. They couldn't operate. They ended up, by the time it was all said and done, it cost them $1.2 million to get their information back. And they did not have cyber liability coverage. They do now, but they did not at the time of the attack. And then finally, one of the other things that's usually covered under most good cyber liability policies is betterment coverage. And that provides costs to improve a computer system after a cybersecurity breach. So it'll eliminate any vulnerabilities that you may have. So here's a few examples of some situations that my client base have run into as far as cyber liability claims go. There was an unauthorized access. An international hacking group gained access to electronically to computerized cash registers of a restaurant chain and stole credit card information of 5,000 customers, starting a flood of fraudulent purchases around the world. That one was enormous as far as that was a policy limits case. Theft of digital assets. A regional retailer contracted with a third-party service provider. A burglar stole 2 laptops from the service provider containing the data of over 800,000 clients of the retailer. Under applicable notification laws, the retailer, not the service provider, was required to notify the affected individuals. Total expenses incurred for the notification and crisis management to the customer was nearly $5 million. That was just in compliance costs. That had nothing to do with any other costs associated with that hack. Privacy breach. An employee of a rehabilitation center improperly disposed of 4,000 client records in violation of the center's privacy policy. The records contained social security numbers, credit cards, debit card account numbers, names, addresses, telephone numbers, as well as sensitive medical information. The center settled the claim with the state of Massachusetts and agreed to pay fines and penalties imposed by the state, as well as an extended $890,000 in customer redress funds for credit monitoring on behalf of the victims. From what I recall about that one is the employee literally just dumped these old files in the trash can, like didn't shred them, didn't destroy them. So you really got to be careful with customer information. Theft of digital assets. A home healthcare organization had backup tapes, laptops, and disks containing social security numbers, clinical and demographic information, and a small number of cases, patient financial data was stolen. In total, over 365,000 patient records were exposed. The organization settled with the state attorney general, providing patients with free credit monitoring, credit restoration to patients that were victims of identity fraud, and reimbursement to patients for direct losses that resulted from the data breach. The organization was also required to revamp its security policies, implement technical safeguards, and conduct random compliance audits. Human error. Human error happens. And in a nonprofit community action corporation, printed two 1099 forms on one piece of paper. An employee was supposed to separate the forms and send each to the rightful owner. Instead, one person received both copies. The mistake sent tax forms and social security numbers to strangers. Approximately 50% of the landlords who worked with the Community Action Corporation received their forms in addition to private information of others. Once a breach like that occurs, even though it's a mistake and maybe there was no damage that occurred, you still have to notify the people that were affected that you made that mistake, and you also have to notify the regulatory authorities that that error occurred, or even more fines come your way. Kind of touched on cyber extortion here a little bit on the law firm example, but US-based information technology company contracted with an overseas software vendor. The contracted vendor left universal administrator defaults installed on the company's server, and a hacker for hire was paid $20,000 to exploit the vulnerability. The hacker advised if the request payment was not made, he would post the records of 1 million registered users on a blog available for all to see. The extortion expenses and monies are expected to exceed $2 million. Human error, another human error situation. Private high school mistakenly distributed via email the names and social security numbers, birth dates, and medical information of students, faculty, etc. Overall, 1,250 individuals' information was compromised. And then a malicious code situation. A juvenile released a computer worm that infected computers to launch denial service attack against Regional Computer Consulting, an application and outsourcing firm. The infection caused an 18-hour shutdown of the entity's computer system, and the loss totaled $875,000. So those are some real life examples of general liability, professional liability, employment practices liability, and cyber liability claims. My contact information is here. I'd be happy to talk to anyone in the audience. please keep in mind, as I said earlier, that price is always important in any transaction, but cheap insurance is by no means the best insurance. And I love this quote by Benjamin Franklin: "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." And I think that rings true in not just my business, but every business owner on this call. So love to answer some questions.
Okay, we have plenty of them, Tom. Thank you
Sure.
so much. That was really jam-packed of information. Okay, I'm going to start at the top. Kathy wants to know, what I want to know is if a customer gets COVID in one of my live cooking classes, why isn't it covered by liability insurance? Is there any coverage I can pay extra to get that?
That's
Last part of it is, I know it'd be hard to prove, but my understanding is that I'd be responsible for any legal fees to prove it. Okay.
correct. Great question. And thank you for asking that question. First part of that question is it covered under the general liability policy? In most instances, no. Most insurers now, and have for years, since the SARS outbreak in the early 2000s in Asia, most insurers have include an exclusion for contagious diseases, virus exclusion. So there is an exclusion on most policies, but check your policy. An unendorsed general liability policy will provide coverage, but most insurers that I deal with and know of today in the United States have an exclusion on the policy that will exclude those type of things. Now, that being said, there are some carriers out there now that offer coverage for COVID type situations, that if you have a lawsuit that arises and whatnot, out of somebody alleging that you gave them COVID or they got COVID at your business, you can buy it. It's not cheap, it's pricey, but it's out there and you can buy it.
Okay. Here's another one. If you are operating your business from your house and have an umbrella policy as well as homeowners insurance, do you still need business general liability policy? No employees, solo owner.
Correct. Yeah, great. Another great question that I get asked frequently in our personal lines arena, because a lot of businesses operate out of their home these days. The homeowners policy and the personal umbrella policy specifically exclude any business pursuit that goes on within your home. So the answer is yes, you would need to buy a general liability policy and an umbrella policy for your business that you're operating in the home. The homeowner's policy is not anticipating any business type of exposure, so that is specifically excluded under the personal policies.
Okay. In insurance in general, why can you have no claims ever and your premium goes up with one small claim? Yeah,
the whole concept of insurance is everybody pays into a pot, and we see it frequently that people say to me frequently, "Oh, Tom, I've never had any claims and my rates go up." That's the concept of insurance, that all pay into the system, and one small claim, and depending on how small it was and what type of premium you're paying, it's always a tough question to answer, because that differs from insurance company to insurance company as to what their stance is regarding rate increases and claims are filed. I have carriers that one small claim, it doesn't affect the premium at all. I have other carriers that they'll cancel your policy over one small claim. So It depends on the carrier, and it depends on the size of the claim. Hope that answers your question.
Okay. Next one is how to locate insurance protection for your business. So I think we kind of have that on the screen. If you need help, Tom's willing to help you and guide you. So there's his contact information. And I think that answers that one. Here's another. Do those who teach classes remotely need professional liability? How about in-person classes?
Yes and yes. If you're teaching classes remotely, I don't see that it really diminishes your exposure from a professional liability standpoint. Whether you're disseminating advice and information over a Zoom meeting like this, or whether you're doing it in person, you would still need both general liability and professional liability coverage, because somebody can take the information that you're using over a Zoom call and misinterpret it, or it could be the wrong advice or not the correct advice, and it causes damage to the person that you're teaching in the class, causes damage to their business, and they can turn around and file a lawsuit against you just as easily for an in-person class that you're teaching as well.
Okay. Here's another one. I teach fitness classes and have insurance that covers that profession, which I understand is a niche industry. I'm looking to expand my business to professional consulting. The company that insures me for fitness classes doesn't cover business insurance. I'm looking at other companies. Are there any downsides to having two separate insurance companies?
The only real downside, in a perfect world, you'd like to have both policies with the same insurance company if you could. And reason being is, if you get into that gray area between, is it a general liability claim or is it a professional liability claim? You don't want to have two different insurance companies pointing the finger at the other going, that's not professional, it's general liability claim. And you don't want the general liability carrier pointing the finger at the professional liability carrier saying, it's not mine, it's theirs. If you have it with the same carrier, they flip the coin and they decide which policy they're going to pay it under. That's the only drawback that I see. And I'd be more than happy to help you secure coverage, depending upon what you're doing, what type of consulting you're now getting into, to see if we can find a carrier for you that can do both the professional and the general liability, so you avoid the situation that I just described.
Okay. We are selling our homemade soap bar. Do we need to buy a business insurance to cover potential customer lawsuits, for example, causing allergy?
Yes, and that's one of your largest exposures. You kind of hit the nail on the head. Anytime that you're distributing a product that people are using, placing on their body, they're consuming it, the product liability laws in the United States are really, really tough. We have what's called strict liability. So if anybody becomes injured or sick using your product, you're stuck with it. And yes, when you're using soap, the first thing that came to my mind was somebody having some sort of topical allergic reaction to the soap and then filing a lawsuit or a claim against you. So yes, you do need general liability coverage for your soap product.
Does having a disclaimer on these products protect you from lawsuits?
No.
Okay, so you need the insurance also.
Yes.
And probably the disclaimer on the products, right?
The disclaimer helps, but
Mhm.
here in the States, you can sue anybody for anything. It's just a matter of whether you win or lose. Unfortunately, everybody has access to the courts. and the lawyers taking these cases on a contingency basis, the person making the claim has nothing to lose. If they're not awarded or win funds, the lawyer doesn't get paid, but the plaintiff doesn't have to pay the lawyer. So that's the unfortunate situation that we're in, that people can sue you for whatever they want to sue you for. It's just a matter of whether they win or lose. So, and the disclaimer, it helps. It'll help you when you get into court that says, hey, our disclaimer says this, but it's not going to prevent you from getting sued. And it's not a get out of jail free card. Just
right. Okay. But you should have it anyway, but
yes,
it's not the answer. Okay.
Correct.
What if I'm sharing an office with another business? The other business is on the lease and the owner is aware that the offer is shared. Should I have my insurance add that place, although the business has liability insurance for the space? I think I read that correctly.
I hear what you're saying. Another great question. But the way that insurance policies, general liability policies work is they are only going to defend and indemnify the named insured. Okay. So whoever is named on that policy is the only one that's getting insurance coverage. So even though you're sharing space, everybody associated with that space should have their own insurance policy. The person asking the question, you could create a negligent situation in that office space. Somebody gets hurt, lawsuits start flying. The other insurance policies that are involved in that space are not going to provide any coverage for you or your business. And the insurance policies that are in place are only going to cover the named insured on that policy. So you're going to see no insurance coverage under any of those. You're going to be out on your own. You're going to have to retain your own lawyer. Any judgment that comes down or any settlement that takes place for a bodily injury or property damage claim is coming out of your own pocket. None of those other insurance policies are going to react. And quite frankly, what they are going to do is they're going to deny the claim and say it wasn't our client's fault. It was the subtenant's fault that didn't have insurance. So yes, you need to buy your own insurance policy.
Okay. Can an employee file a claim against an employer if he doesn't have air conditioning, so he doesn't have a comfortable environment in which to work?
That's a great question. And I would think that I think it would depend upon the business, number one. But I think that is more of a situation that the courts would have to determine whether you have to do that or not. I would think not. But again, if you have a situation where you have an employee that has a protected disability, and it's crazy what disabilities are protected. And you may not know that your employee has a protected disability or an illness. So potentially, maybe. I know that's not 100% answer, but if an employee ends up quitting and then goes and says, I had to quit my job. I asked my employer to put an air conditioner in my office on numerous occasions, and I had to quit my job because, I'm a diabetic and I could die if, it gets too hot. Potentially, yeah, I could see that they may have a case. So I think the long and short answer is it depends.
Okay.
It depends.
Right. I can understand that. Is cyber liability covered under the website company that a business uses?
Normally not.
Okay.
Most providers that you use, the contract that you sign, they all now have it written into their contracts that anything like that happens, they're not going to be responsible for. You're always able to go back and sue, whoever your provider is, but it's up to you to show that they did something wrong and they were negligent. And then you're hopeful that they have a professional liability policy of their own. They have a cyber liability policy of their own that's going to react in those instances. But for you directly, no, you're better off. You're better off buying the cyber liability policy for you and your business.
Okay. Are there any, and I know this is going to be hard to answer because it's not a one size fits all. Are there any affordable insurance plans that are available for businesses that are just starting out and need the majority of the plans you mentioned? Does the plan price depend on business size?
Absolutely. I have, in some businesses, I have general liability policies, depending upon what class of business it is. I've recently sold several policies that for general liability, they're under $300 a year or under $400 a year. So they're in the high threes for a general liability policy. Once you get into the professional coverages, they tend to get a little bit more pricey because that's really where your exposure is. But to answer your question, long and short of it is, I guess, what your definition of expensive is. In most instances for businesses just starting out, that are one-man, two-man operations, two-people operations, the overall cost is not cost restrictive for any of the policies that I just reviewed.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for an individual in a niche consulting field such as sustainability, environmental, health, and safety regarding where to find this type of insurance? I've been recommended to go to my professional societies who partner with insurance companies. Are there any insurance provider resources I can access?
I'm not really sure that I understand that question, but if you are looking for professional liability, I can help you. I can't promise you that I can find something that fits your need, but I certainly can help. There are certain associations out there that's one of the main reasons they exist, is to provide affordable professional liability coverage for their membership. But I literally have access to hundreds of different professional liability markets. So I'd be happy to help. If you give me a call offline, I'll be happy to see if I can help and get a little bit more information as to see what you're trying to accomplish and understand the question a little bit better. And provide you with a solution.
Is product liability covered under a general liability policy?
In almost every instance, yes. So that would be the soap manufacturer, or whatever you're manufacturing, power equipment, bicycles, widgets, whatever it may be. And your product can also be the service or your end product, somebody that puts additions on homes, the addition is your product, or the finished basement is your product. So in most instances, product liability is included under a general liability policy, unless it's a really, really risky type of product that you're making, that an insurance company would have to carve that out. So in most instances, yes, it's covered.
Okay. Is that professional liability a subset of general liability, or a separate policy?
It's a totally separate policy.
Totally separate. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Here's another one. If I'm entering life care communities to set up my business, do I need anything in addition to general liability?
As long as you're not giving advice on a professional basis, if you have no employees, if you have no cyber exposure, if you have employees, you may be required to buy workers' compensation coverage. If you're the only individual working for your organization because you are a subcontractor, a lot of entities now that are subcontracting that type of work to you will require that you have your own workers' compensation coverage. So that's potentially out there for you. But as long as you're just going in and setting up equipment and breaking equipment down, the general liability policy should cover you for bodily injury and property damage claims that arise. You may also want to look at automobile type coverage, depending upon how you're getting to these sites. If you don't have a business automobile policy, you should also have what's called non-owned and hired automobile liability coverage. So as you're entering and exiting that facility, if you run anybody over, your personal auto policy may or may not react, or the limits may not be high enough. And the non-owned automobile coverage will provide you commercial coverage for a vehicle that you're using in the course of your business.
Okay. I think this is our last one. What about a policy for a music business? What kind of policy is needed? Music is production and distribution. Not sure I totally understand that, but.
Yeah, that's another great question. Publishing opens up, and regardless of what you're publishing, opens up a whole host of additional liability coverages. And there are packaged what are called media professional liability policies out there that would really fit your need. So would love to talk to you about that as well, because there are niche products out there that could bundle your your publishing issues and then your general liability issues as well.
Okay. All right. We have one more just came in. Does personal insurance cover if you have a sign for your business on the car and use it for business purposes?
I would think that you're going to have a problem with your personal automobile carrier if you're advertising your business on your vehicle. I would remove that immediately. Depending upon what type of business it is, you should have a discussion with your personal insurer, because a lot of folks get themselves into trouble using their personal auto policy thinking it's a business auto policy, and it's not. It's a discussion that you have to have with your personal automobile carrier. At bare minimum, your personal automobile carrier is going to rate you as business use. Most carriers, or if you're in a delivery type business, a contracting type business, in no way, shape, or form are they going to allow you to have a personal auto policy on a using it for business. Most carriers are that way. So be very, very careful and be transparent with your personal carrier if you're using a personal vehicle on a personal auto policy in business. Have that discussion and get it in writing from them after the discussion takes place.
Okay, we have time for one more, just came in. What type of insurance is needed for an online t-shirt business?
Another great question. Depending if you have employees or not, you're going to need workers' compensation coverage. You're going to need general liability coverage. You're definitely going to need cyber coverage because you're operating online. You're going to need property coverage. At bare minimum, you're going to need non-owned and hired auto coverage, workers' compensation, and potentially umbrella coverages, and again, depending upon if you have employees or not, those type of issues. Printers, essentially, you're a printer with online issues. You're going to need printers professional liability coverage. So that right off the cuff, those are the items that off the bat you're going to need to properly protect your business.
Okay. I guess the message, Tom, is when in doubt, consult a professional. Consult right.
Correct.
You just don't know what you don't know. Whether you're a real small business or you're a business that's been in for a while, you have two wonderful resources in which to tap into. Tom is one. His information is on the screen. He's also a resource partner of ours. And please feel free to look at and request a mentor. I put this in the chat earlier. It's buckscounty.score.org. Our mentors can give you the information you need. I saw some questions about LLCs. So that is definitely in our wheelhouse. We can help you with that. Also, we can refer to several insurance people, Tom being one of them. So please reach out to us. I know that we can help you. Again, it is free, and we can make your business safe and secure if you follow the directions that we give you. So thank you, Tom. This was wonderful. So much information, and we thank you for putting this together for us. Again, to remind everyone, you will get a copy of the recording and you will get a copy of the slides. So thank you all for being with us, and I hope to see you next Tuesday. And our topic will be basic product and service sales skills. So thanks again, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.